I'm currently hooked on boxing and other combat sports, but my ultimate guilty pleasure is influencer boxing. Yes, I know it's frowned upon sometimes by the pro boxing community, but I find it to be an entertaining section of the internet, and I think it's good for boxing as a whole. YouTube boxing is getting to the point where certain fighters have gained a decent amount of skill, with Jake Paul being the frontrunner. He recently defeated Tyron Woodley for a second time, knocking him out cold. While his feats have been impressive and knocking out a former UFC champion is nothing to sneeze at, I think he's not the huge pay-per-view star like traditional boxing media likes to claim. I wanted to talk about this and how playing the villain or heel in boxing at least isn't as effective as one might think nowadays. To give you some context, I'm not a boxing expert, I'm only 22 years old and I'm a huge fan of YouTube culture. That's how I really got interested in actual pro boxing. Anyway, I consider Floyd Mayweather to be the ultimate boxing heel, and he became a gigantic box office draw when he adopted the Money Mayweather persona. He was brash, arrogant, and everyone wanted to see him lose, which made Mayweather fortunes as a result. People would get invested in their country's best boxer, for example the UK and Ricky Hatton, thinking he would be able to get the job done against Mayweather, only to see them lose shortly after. Rinse and repeat until Floyd retired with an unbeaten record of 50-0. I mean, with Mayweather's final pro fight, everyone and their mother wanted to see McGregor finally put an end to Mayweather's reign. But that didn't happen, with Conor getting knocked out in round 10. I do believe that some of Mayweather's box office success depended on his opponent and the country that backed them. But yeah, for a while at least, Mayweather's persona made him a huge draw. People were paying to see him lose, which worked in 2010, but nowadays I don't see the same villain marketing approach working in the slightest. This is where Jake Paul comes into the equation. Nicknamed the problem child, Jake Paul has become one of the most talked about guys in boxing. Listen to me carefully. One of the most talked about guys in boxing. Not the biggest boxing draw, not the most skillful boxer of all time, just the most discussed. Boxing fans love feeding into the Jake Paul game by talking about him. When you try to discredit his boxing ability or his resume, you're only feeding into his success. Kind of. It certainly gives him more impressions on social media, but that doesn't necessarily translate to event sales. Boxing heads typically look at the 20 million subscriber count and think, wow, he has such a big audience, which he does, but most of those subs have grown up and were only there for the Disney Channel era of his career. My main point, however, is that with the rise of piracy and illegal boxing streams, if you aren't liked by the boxing community and you play the villain to attract viewers, what's stopping those people from just streaming your fights instead of buying the pay-per-view? I'm not condoning piracy, but if you try to play the heel, fans have very easy access to your fights illegally, which could negatively impact your pay-per-view numbers and your status as a box office draw. Let's look at another YouTube boxer, KSI. He has a dedicated fanbase that absolutely love him. He has an entire country behind him with the UK, and he has branched out into multiple types of content creation. KSI might not be fighting better opponents than Jake Paul with Tyron Woodley, but he is still a massive pay-per-view draw because he is liked among the community and he has played the hero in the past. I think the era of boxing heels is kinda dead in the water because of piracy, and the fact that the majority of people who glance at Jake Paul's boxing career only care about the finishes, which they can get a clip of from Twitter or any other social media. They aren't going to go out of their way to buy the $60 fucking pay-per-view, and speaking of which, boxing fights need to drop their price at some point. DAZN is a great service, and I think a subscription model needs to be the way forward for boxing, but now they're introducing DAZN pay-per-views, which defeats the whole point. I don't care how they try to spin it. Pay-per-views on DAZN is a direct fucking contradiction to the initial selling point of the platform. Regardless, the more likable fighters will be the biggest draws, and you'll see that with KSI's next fight. Anthony Joshua, Manny Pacquiao, and even Usyk now, all good dudes who you want to see fight and support. Even though playing the villain will get you attention fast, especially when you're knocking out former UFC champions who have stuck among fans, I think we'll see this heel business model not translate into actual pay-per-view sales going forward. Maybe I'm wrong, but the Mayweather effect is pretty much over in this digital age. However, if you're a likable boxer with a dedicated fanbase who actually support you, then you will be a draw.